In today's fast-paced world, having a strong body is important, but cultivating a resilient mind is equally essential for wellness and longevity. Our guest today has a multifaceted background, including wellness tech revolutionary, philosopher, coach, speaker, and author. Notably, he holds the distinction of being the first official non-Chinese 32nd generation Shaolin monk. He has not only impacted lives across 30 countries, but has also pioneered innovative approaches to wellness and mindfulness, revolutionizing how we perceive and cultivate holistic well being. This is the story of the Shaolin monk with Walter Gjergja, Shi Xing me. Walter, so nice to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I have to add, I was reading through your biography and it's just fascinating. A Shaolin monk, you hear about this in the movies of the past of, someone traveling to China to train into being a Shaolin monk, but you usually don't. This is my first encounter with a Shaolin monk, so I'm very honored by it. But perhaps you could tell us how you went from the Italian Alps, where you were born, which we discussed just a second ago. You're currently in Switzerland on the other side in the Alps. But how'd you go from that to really getting involved at a young age with becoming a Shaolin monk?
Actually, it's a story that intersects a little bit of destiny, karma, whatever you want to call it. But by some fortunate circumstance, when I was a young teenager, one of the first Shaolin Kung Fu schools in Europe opened in the village where I was born, which is a somewhat unusual circumstance because it was a small village. So we're not talking a major capital city, but a gentleman from this village learned something during his military service, then returned there. It was, the era of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, and he thought that this could be a viable business. And I became quickly passionate about this, but I never thought that it would bring me to China. It was a kind of after-school sport and hobby. And then I became let's say, a professional athlete in martial arts, although in martial arts at that time, professional athlete just means that you trained all day, but there was no income from it.
Yes.
And and then eventually the practice got me more and more interested in both the philosophical and let's call it the sports sciences aspect of it, and the medical and health and well-being and fitness aspect of it. And that's when the seed of, studying this at university and then perhaps going actually back to the source, to the monastery in China, that's when the seed started to take place.
Mm. And since that seed was planted, what have you kind of, grasped from the Shaolin monk, I would say, principles and knowledge that now you're starting to apply or are applying within health and wellness? What are the main concepts, I would say? Because not many people are too familiar with what it takes to become a Shaolin monk.
I think that the most powerful takeaway, at least as I bring, this idea of mixing tradition and modernity, because I have inside me two souls in a way. I have a very scientific soul and this very traditional soul. Is I am very, in some way, relieved and pleased by the fact that modern science and modern medicine and fitness science and wellness science is rediscovering some principles that I read in 1,000-year-old texts. For example, the fact that mental and physical well-being are part of one ecosystem
Mhm.
and that they impact each other in a tremendously, undetachable way. So you can be, physically unwell and it will have a mental health impact and vice versa in many profound and nuanced ways. This was spoken about, 1,000 years ago. And the idea was train the body with the mind and train the mind with the body. This is one of the simple, key Shaolin principles. And here we are, 1,000 years later, rediscovering the exact same principle through scientific research and so on. And this for me is one of the most powerful things that I think this culture can bring in modern society, but also one of the most powerful rediscoveries of modern science, which is happening right now.
I agree with you 100% in that what the ancient civilizations before us understood their knowledge base was quite profound. They just had different words, different technologies, different ways of measuring things, correct? And science today has become very technical. We have great advancements in technology, but the words of quantum physics and the words of that we understood in the past may be different. Concepts are the same. And that's what's so interesting that your tagline, ancient wisdom for modern times, is the melding. It's the intersection of these and to take everything and not to dismiss. what we've learned. Do you feel that a lot of what we're dealing with issues of, let's say, depression, chronic disease, are in some ways that we're forgetting the lessons taught to us from the ancients of connecting with nature, of mind body medicine instead of just body biochemical medicine? Is that part of the issue that you're trying to solve?
Absolutely. I think we are in some way forgetting, or we did forget them, and we are now rediscovering them through science and through medicine. And surprisingly enough, the ancient methods were themselves very scientific. When I went to Shaolin and I learned how methods were developed, it was absolutely kind of a scientific approach where a bunch of monks will test on themselves different practices for decades and document the impact of these practices and then make adjustments. No, this we're going to get rid of it because it's not working. And oh, this had a surprising positive effect. Let's delve deeper into this. So, as I mentioned, this rediscovery, it's in my way, in my opinion, very powerful, and it's in many facets of well-being. You mentioned mental health and physical health, but it even goes so far as daily, let's say, practices like fitness. If you think of Western fitness, it tends to be quite monothematic, at least until recently. People either did cardio and they were running every morning, or they were, bodybuilding and weightlifting and so on. Very often, men will gravitate more towards these muscle practices, and women towards the keep slim cardio practices. And again, going back to what the ancients tried and tested on themselves was there are texts mentioning how true physical well-being and longevity has to come from a kind of triumvirate of practices, which are mobility and flexibility. Because
Mhm.
as we get older, we get stiffer. They use these metaphors of like a young green plant and a dry stick.
Mhm.
Um, Cardiovascular health, so aerobic training, because our cardiovascular system needs to be kept active and energetic and efficient. And muscular health, to prevent what, again, with metaphors, they called it the decaying fruit. But we call it now sarcopenia, but it's the same thing. It's a kind of ripened fruit which becomes soft and doesn't have any tension anymore. So again, here a little example of how this combination of um, trial and error and scientific approach in a primordial way led us to find the same things that we are now rediscovering through scientific research. And I think that there is a lot of beauty in that, and there is a lot of beauty in rediscovering some of these old methods on how to more than cure, prevent the onset of issues.
One of the things that comes up when people talk about this idea of living a healthy life, a balanced life, one of, mind, body, spirit, is the idea of the time they have to do so. One may point to, well, I don't have time to train in the Shaolin monk ways and devote myself to such things. I have a 9 to 5, family, mortgages, all these things that people get bogged down in their modern day life. How do you take what you dedicated yourself and start to apply it to the average person that lives in this very, you could say, busy modern world?
Frankly, first of all, modern technology offers us ample tools to be able to do these type of things in a very effective and also time effective way. But if we want to hyper simplify the habits, so without even mentioning now apps and all kinds of other tools that we have at our disposal to track and adjust our habits and our behaviors, um, let's use the example of movement, because it's a classic example where people say, I have no time to train, or at least to train as holistically as I perhaps should. Well, first of all, let's go high level. If you go to a gym and you observe somebody in the gym who is there for usually more than an hour because they made the effort to go to the gym, between scrolling on their phone, chatting with the person on the machine next to them, checking themselves in the mirror, waiting for some equipment to be available, the real training time is perhaps 20 minutes. And that means that you could probably do 20 minutes of very intense training, and
Mhm.
you will obtain quite similar results to this huge time investment, which is very dispersive. But let's get even smaller, because habit forming starts usually with very small commitment. I think everybody, no matter how busy their lives, can commit 1 minute at the beginning of every hour, from when they wake up to when they go to sleep, to doing some kind of physical activity. And let's imagine that today's choice of physical activity is squats, standing up and down from your chair. In a minute, you can probably do around 30 quite easily. Okay. So if you are at work, for example, for 10 hours, that's 300 squats. That's a reasonable legs workout. You are not going to get, deficiencies in your leg muscles if you're doing 300 body weight squats a day. And that's just 1 minute at the end of every hour. That's training from 8:59 to 9, from 9:59 to 10, and so on. So this is just an example on how I think that all practices, first of all, they can be distilled in small pills. They don't have to be a huge amount of time investment. And secondly, they can be interspersed throughout our daily life in a very organic way. It doesn't have to be this, block where now I invest, 2 or 3 hours of time to do my practices. In fact, I think that sometimes that becomes a little bit overwhelming and it seldom leads to a long lasting practice.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, most of us, spend our times, at work or at the gym somewhat inefficiently. I saw a stat that we work, truly work about 2 hours and 30 minutes or so out of an 8 hour workday. And like you said, it's water cooler talk, it's walking around, checking online, going through emails that really aren't work, other things, and looking at the internet and social media. The interesting part about you is that you have a background in wellness tech as well, and you have a background in corporations, and you've done some big things in the corporate world. And yet there is this body mind, this Shaolin ancient tradition upon you as well. How do you meld the two? Because I find that is, somewhat challenging for people to stay connected to technology yet meditate, to quiet their mind yet everything's busy on their phone and using technology, and you become addicted to one and you release the other in a sense. How do you meld that and balance it out as someone who has an appreciation of both sides?
I think a key element is discipline, but we very often associate discipline with a kind of negative connotation. To be disciplined is a synonym for being punished, when in fact, the discipline is in some way the greatest enabler. For example, most people like money, not because of the pieces of paper, but because it's a very powerful enabler. It enables you to get material things, experiences, safety, and so on. Um, well, discipline is in some way the greatest enabler. It either enables you, if you apply yourself with discipline to your project or your career or whatever, it probably enables you also to get more money, which is this other secondary enabler that I mentioned. So, discipline viewed as a very powerful and very positive enabler, it's a way to create habits. And the discipline actually usually needs to be applied only at the beginning of the habit forming. And then the habit becomes just a natural part of who you are. So, I have moments of, let's call it, contemplation or meditation every day. And I intersperse them throughout the day in a very organic, natural way. They are not big moments. They may be a few minutes, or they may be longer if I'm, on a Sunday hiking in the mountains. But I intersperse them in a very natural, organic way. So I am not actually setting time out for meditation. It just happens naturally when I'm sitting on a taxi or I'm on a flight or I have 5 minutes between two Zoom calls or whatever else. The same with training. I, through discipline, learned to wake up earlier, and I created a big buffer in the morning which allows me to start the day in a very positive, powerful way by engaging the body first, which also creates a kind of big energy boost for the whole day, both in terms of physical energy and mental health energy. So I wake up earlier in the morning and automatically I have a big buffer zone of a couple of hours before I have to actually get going with the daily tasks. And in those couple of hours, of course, you can do many, many, many things in terms of training and practices or whatever else. So I think it's a matter of structuring it very naturally throughout the day. Start with a little discipline, make small commitments, don't impose on yourself, some kind of drastic life change. And then slowly, as those small commitments become natural, the habit no longer will even need the discipline.
I'm interested. You speak about, having this organic sort of shifting, a little bit dynamic in some ways, ability to intersperse these mindfulness practices. And you have this, you say a focus somewhat on morning routine in some ways. Let's just call it that. I don't know if it's a routine. That's what I'm trying to get at here. Because you look at some of the most, let's say, successful or healthy people, and the way they start their day is incredibly important. Most of us start our day where we get up a little bit late. We either go directly to coffee to wake us up because we didn't sleep well, or we lean over and start perusing our phone and get into a sympathetic nervous state and stressed already about emails that may have came in overnight. Not exactly the healthiest way to get started. So, how do you, Walter, as a Shaolin monk, start your day? Is it routine? Is it 30 minutes meditation, 30 minutes movement? Or is it also, like you said, more organic based on how you're feeling?
I would say that the morning is very structured, although, as I said, I don't have an application of discipline because it comes totally natural to me, having done it for many, many, many years, for
Mm,
more than 30 years. But my morning usually starts with physical training. So I
mhm,
will get up, have a very light breakfast, just a kind of very light food that will digest very quickly, do a little meditation before the breakfast, just to kind of clear my mind and prepare for the day ahead, but we're talking about 5, 10 minutes, not a very intensive practice. And
mhm.
then I train. I go running if I can, if the weather allows it. I run outdoors in the mountains or wherever I am. I do weightlifting, I do martial arts. So altogether is like an hour and a half to 2 hours of training. But clearly, I wake up early enough to be able to do all of this and then have a shower and a healthy breakfast and then begin the work day as it should begin. And I think that one of the most powerful habits, you've already mentioned that a lot of people that tend to be very driven in what they're pursuing have this habit, is to wake up earlier in the day, which, however, should not mean to sleep less. I'm a big proponent of quality sleep and quantity also of sleep. Then, of course, it's variable subjectively to within a reasonable range. So if you wake up at 6 a.m. or at 5 a.m. to do your practices, clearly you have to go to bed earlier.
Absolutely. No, I think that's one of the things that high performers miss. It's that balance of also understanding that your performance can't stay high forever if you don't have adequate rest and regeneration, which is sleep. That's when it happens. Now, a big portion of what you mentioned there was this outdoors. You're in the Swiss Alps. These are all being closer to nature. A lot of people nowadays are the opposite. They live in cities. I myself lived 20 years in New York City, one of the largest cities, in the world. And, um, I noticed that it wasn't always the most beneficial to my health and that sometimes you don't have that connection to nature. What do you tell to people in those scenarios that are living in a city, which is going to be higher levels of stress in general, less connection probably to nature, a little bit more of a hectic lifestyle? How does one find the balance within such a, you could say, chaotic state?
Look, where there is a will, there is a way. I'm very often in cities for business reasons, and
Hmm.
I find that actually fascinating to run through the early morning streets in the city. When they're almost deserted,
Mm,
and the city is almost an organism waking up. And I observe this organism waking up almost as if the city is a living being. And I think there is something very fascinating in that. We are a part of nature, but we are also nature. We are not detached from nature. We don't go to nature. We are nature. So in some way, millions of humans waking up together and starting their processes and so on. That's also a natural process. That's also a natural ecosystem. So I think that sometimes we think too much of the utopia, the perfect mountain with the forest, with the spring, and there I would meditate, but in the city I don't,
yeah.
Or when people tell me, oh, in the temple I would feel so serene in the temple. Okay, go to the temple, train 7 hours a day, sleep on a hard plank of wood with no heating, and then tell me how serene you are feeling,
Yeah.
So we always think of the grass greener on the other side. I think we have very blessed lives as long as we are healthy enough and we can do something. It's already a tremendous blessing. And then it's a matter of using that blessing,
Yeah.
and doing our best. And the first person that we should do our best for is ourselves. We should optimize ourselves because if we let our health decay, whether it's physical or mental or overall energy state, we're automatically less of a father, of a mother, of a manager, of a whatever we are in life, whatever roles we play in life. So we have a kind of duty and responsibility to ourselves and to those we love and we interact with to optimize ourselves and to take care of ourselves, to be our best selves that we can be.
What you say there is something I espouse and truly believe our greatest wealth is health, and that without it, everything else doesn't really fall into place in our lives. Yet we have to acknowledge that we're kind of in a state where we have the most rates of chronic disease. We have things rampant like cancer, depression in children, obesity in children, diabetes. I mean, it getting younger and younger. I work at a medical center and with doctors all the time, and they're saying these aren't cases for older generations anymore. These are people coming in with their whole lives ahead of them, yet told they have an incurable disease and they must suffer for the rest of their lives. We don't believe in that and believe that health can be regained, but you have to start to wonder, why is this? Do we not value health as much? Are we kind of in this self-sabotaging way? We know McDonald's isn't good. We know sitting watching 10 hours of Netflix in a row isn't good. And yet many of us do this and we end up in these places. What would be your recommendation to someone that's trying to change, but it doesn't seem that maybe there is a value to it. I always ponder why so many aren't valuing this thing that is, so significant. And once you lose it, you'll do anything to get it back.
This is a very complex question. I mean, let's look at some different elements of this question. The first one being that the reasons for this situation that you've described so perfectly is are many. There are social reasons, there are cultural reasons, there are commercial reasons, there are lots of reasons. But the recipe to counteract all of that is actually very simple. I mean, you know it, sleep enough, move your body, eat food that is actual food and is not some kind of processed pseudo food, And if you just apply these 3 or 4 very simple rules, you've already done the 80-20. Okay. Then, of course, you can fine tune the macros and the micronutrients, and you can, perfect your sleep zones, and you can train mobility and cardio and whatever in the right balance for you. These are all fine tunings, but just move more, eat food that is real food, sleep enough, and you've already done, the 80-20. And I think that, in some way, all of these multitude of factors that play against us, they make a lever on some primitive instinct that we have. I mean, until not so long ago, so we're talking about for hundreds of thousands of years of us being Homo sapiens, life was, whether you like it or not, tremendously active.
Mm.
You hunted in the forest, you worked in the fields, you dug for fruits and vegetables, you escaped from wild animals. Life was tremendously active. And the moments of rest were extremely rare and extremely treasured. So we were programmed to enjoy and really relish and treasure these moments of rest. And same with the moments of abundance. Unlimited tasty food happened maybe once a year, and you truly relished it and enjoyed it as much as you can. There was no fridge to keep it either. So you ate also as much as you can. Now we are paradoxically in a condition where the moments of rest are almost infinite if we so choose to live a life like that. And the abundance of tasty food is almost infinite if we so choose to live a life like that. So we need to, in some way, reprioritize ourselves and control these primordial instincts a little bit better. And I think that all of these things that we touched on, society, culture, commerce, and so on, they kind of play on that. So we are in a way fighting a battle with a lot of impulses that try to drag us towards some misbehaviors, let's call them. But as I said, fortunately, I think that the recipe is quite simple. So it's just a matter of becoming aware and not doing what people unfortunately usually do, which is wait until there is a problem and then panic and try to fix, but realize that inevitably the problem will come if I don't take care of it before.
Absolutely. And so much of that also comes from that mental ability to push through tough times and the ability to, it's really adaptability, I would say. As you said, if you go from nature to the city, you don't just break down yourself, you carry it over, you adapt to your new surroundings, you run in the city, you enjoy that as well. And adaptability, a lot of times, is that ability for your mind to grasp something, to actually change and be able to take that on in a positive way. So I know you have 4 specific mindfulness training programs. Could you go into those a little bit and how those can help people with the mental aspects of the world that we live in?
So without getting too much into the details, basically they start from 2 different perspectives. There are people who need to start by activating their bodies. So they are neglecting their physiological life. They are very distant from their physiology. They're very distant from their physical energy. And so the programs start by addressing that standpoint. And within those programs, I have a variety of them, some of them which takes place live within live events. and some of them which take place through technology. So there is an app, for example, that I've co-created called Xing AI Coach, and we use AI to coach you into moving, all
Hmm.
kinds of movement, flexibility, cardio, strength, and so on and so forth. Then there are other programs which address from the mental part for people who are already activating the body, but somehow it still didn't bridge the gap between the mental well-being, whether they have very high levels of stress or they have some specific problematic like anxiety disorder or panic disorder and so on. So we come from the mind side. And then the other two programs, they are more specific to people who have very high level performance wishes. So professional athletes or people that have a very specific performance field. And as you know very well, sometimes actually to pursue the ultimate performance in a very narrow field is not ideal from the standpoint of well-being and longevity.
Hmm.
It might actually be detrimental to well-being and longevity. But there is a clear purpose for that. I need to win my gold medal, and to do that, I need to hyper optimize a certain performance in a certain field in a certain moment. Although that may have an opportunity cost in terms of overall well-being. One concept that overrides all this, which I'd like to touch on, is the concept of energy, which I find very interesting because in all the ancient texts, there is always this mention of energy, energy, energy. In Chinese, it's called qi,
She.
life energy.
Hmm.
And very often people think, it's some kind of metaphysical mumbo jumbo that doesn't really exist. But you know very well that when you go to a doctor and you say that you don't feel well, the first thing they'll ask you is, how's your energy? Do you feel full of energy or do you feel no energy? So those metaphors of life force and life energy are nothing more than to try to say, on a holistic way, when we look at you as a body, mind, and spirit as well, if we want to touch that element as well, you feel your energy and you feel when you're full of energy or when you're devoid of energy, and even just having the flu drastically reduces your energy level. If you ask somebody with the flu, do you have a lot of energy? They will for sure say no. So this ability to become mindful of your energy and to just feel when your energy is going in the wrong way and understand why, that is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful effects of any kind of practices. Because automatically you become, in a way, your own doctor, not
Mm.
on a problem level, but on a prevention level, because energy usually starts to drop way before you actually get unwell, whether it's mentally unwell or physically unwell. So if you can pick it up and understand where it comes from and make the right adjustments, very often it prevents a lot of worse things from occurring.
Yeah, a lot of times I was speaking with a doctor before this, and we were saying how symptoms are really just calls for change. Symptoms are your body saying something's off here, please pay attention. Pain is that way for the body to say, really pay attention. This isn't going to be pleasant, but I need you to change for me to get us back into a homeostasis and a balanced place that is health. But for many, I think the concept is we've normalized, poor energy, and we find it hard to respond to the symptoms. We'd rather suppress them. How do we lean into the pain, into the fear of change sometimes, and other, ways that we resist? How do we combat that more so and be able to not just run away from it in the way we have in so many things that we do in medicine and health?
Actually, I think that you've touched on a very interesting point, is acceptance of low levels of energy.
Mm,
I would venture even further, and I challenge sometimes, especially some high profile people who I work with, um, who view this low level of energy almost as a badge of honor. It's a
yes.
proof of success. And think about it. You meet them and you say, how do you feel? I'm exhausted. I'm jet lagged. I sleep 3 hours. I'm a successful person. Okay. And I challenge this by saying, real success, first of all, is determined by how you feel. If you feel awful and with low energy, you are not successful, regardless of your bank account or any other variable. Okay. But secondly, even if we want to measure your pure performance, real performance is performance which is sustainable over time. Real performance is not performance where you squeeze every drop out of yourself until there is nothing more to squeeze. And then something gives up, as you know, whether you get physically unwell, arrhythmias and all kinds of physiological disease, whether you get mentally unwell, burnout, depression, or whatever else, something will eventually give up. Sometimes physically and mentally you hold it together, but then you break down emotionally. And so what happens is relationships fall apart. So something eventually gives up within this uh, triumvirate of body, mind, and spirit or emotions. So the idea is to have sustainable performance that lasts for long and possibly for a lifelong period of time. And sustainable performance does not come from that attitude. Sustainable performance comes from an attitude where every day I'm cultivating my energy by engaging my body, my mind, and my spirit, my emotions into perhaps little practices, but each one counts maybe 10%, but all together, they create a 100% recipe of caring for my personal ecosystem. I think that that's the way in which we have to view this journey towards well-being or towards maintaining our well-being for a long period of time. And in Shaolin, the old text, to again mention these old texts and how they bridge to the modern scientific outlook, they are never about longevity. They are about prolonging quality of life.
Mm.
The idea is never about, try to live 10 years more, try to live until the last day, ideally, actively, brightly, joyfully engaged, and so on.
This really hits on a subject I talk about a lot in modern medicine is this idea that we've elongated life but prolonged suffering. You get the chronic disease at 40, and yes, you could still live till 70, but each year will be a little bit worse. Well, you'll need a little bit more medication, a surgery mixed in there, one or two, some help getting around, ending up in a nursing home, probably, where you can't do too many things yourself, and that quality goes incredibly down. Is it your belief in the Shaolin, belief as a whole that we can live higher quality and longer? Because some people would say, well, you need to sacrifice one for the other. It's an either or, where you'd say sacrifice your happiness to live longer and your quality, or anything like this, or the other way around. But others would say you can absolutely do both. You could live very long and high quality life. Is that the belief that you have that you can live quality and quantity?
Absolutely. I think that the things that create quality create also quantity.
Mm,
So the ingredients of the two recipes are the same. So I think that quality and quantity come together. And the idea, exactly as you mentioned before, is to start as early as possible, to not wait until that there is all kinds of degenerative processes in place, because many of them also cannot be fully recovered. you know if you are totally unmobile and you have severe mobility problems at 50 or at 60, you're not going to recover your mobility of when you were 20 ever. It's impossible, no matter the quantity of practices and stretching and healthy nutrition and anti-inflammatory lifestyle that you have. But if you, for example, start flexibility and mobility practice in a small form at 20,
mhm.
you will at 50 still have the same flexibility and mobility. You just maintain it throughout your life and you will start degrading only around 70, 80. It's surprising actually how a lot of the things that we started thinking of as a natural consequence of aging, they are not. They're a natural consequence of inactive aging. you know for example, before I mentioned earlier on in our conversation, I mentioned sarcopenia. And uh, sarcopenia was thought that it's almost a sentence that starts happening at 30 or 40 and creeps on, and by 70 you basically lost all your muscle power. And now there is plenty of modern research which again reflects something that was written in these ancient texts, where the peach can remain very firm and ripe well into the 60s and 70s and 80s. But you need to train, you need to do stuff. If you're not doing your push-ups and squats, to use two banal examples, of course it's going to go away. Use it or lose it. It's a very simple but very correct phrase.
Is that something you witnessed in the Shaolin culture and in Shaolin monks, that many of them grew to an old age and still kept their wit, kept all their, facilities in that way? Or is there a point of course, at 80 or so, you'd start to, decline? People don't know this. I think there's the thought process that Shaolin monks may live for hundreds of years or so, but I mean, they're still humans.
Actually, what was interesting to me when I observed the older generations is that there is an onset of diseases eventually. You know, the
Mm,
organism degenerates on a cellular level, and eventually there is an onset of disease. But usually it's quite sudden
mhm,
and at a very advanced stage. So the typical journey through life of a Shaolin monk is until around the late 70s, early 80s, they are absolutely super active. You know, they will hike every morning up the mountain. You know, we're talking about 1,000-meter altitude change to then do some practice on top of the peak. Then will come down. They will be active all day. They will teach. So mentally, they're very bright. Then around 80, 85, 88, there is a sudden decline. There is an onset of some illness, whether it's cancer or heart disease or whatever, and very rapidly they will live life. And they will do so also, I guess, perhaps the rapidity is because they don't want any medical, let's say, emphasis. They don't want to, over
mhm.
therapeutic themselves. They accept that I've made my life journey. It's been wonderful. You know, I was active. I served my purpose in this world. Now I'm old. Something has come to my organism that's telling me, this body, it's time that it finishes its journey. And so they accept it very serenely. They don't, try in any possible way to elongate further, as you said, with a very, very degraded quality of life.
It's a very counter approach, I would say, or at least the way people go about things as to the westernized side. Westernized, you hear something and your initial reaction is non-acceptance or acceptance of some medical intervention right away. As we know, people when they're told they have cancer at any age is a shock to the body, and suddenly you have almost this nocebo effect of, oh my God, negative information, even though many times you know that if you're younger, especially if you're vibrant, you should be able to bounce back. Again, these are symptoms and signs, and your body has amazing self-healing capabilities, but we then accept the fate that we are there. It seems like this idea of acceptance, of letting go, is very important in not just the Shaolin way, but also in just a successful way of doing it. Whereas we hang on to things, we're in fearful states for so long. Do you think those levels of consciousness that so many live in, of fear, of non-acceptance, are, part of the reason we see so much disease today?
Partially yes, because as I think we are discovering more and more, our mental state, whether it's even something as simple as stress, when it's prolonged over a long period of times, it has a substantial detrimental effect to our organism, even on a physiological level. So, high spikes of stress are actually in some way beneficial. They trigger all kinds of responses that we are trained to have, because once upon a time, from behind the bushes would jump the lion, and I need to very quickly react and very quickly be able to manage this dangerous situation. So these kind of brief spikes are actually in some way beneficial to us. They're a form of training, but the very kind of underlying deep-seated fears and worries and concerns for months and years, or perhaps lifelong concerns and fears, they are deeply damaging to our organism. I believe, and I know that science is also more and more finding some proof of this. And therefore, I think that part of this healthy journey through life is also this very serene acceptance. And now we're going a little bit towards philosophy and perhaps even religion. So everybody has their own beliefs. But within the Shaolin monastery, there is this idea that life is a temporary journey within an organism, this body that I inhabit. And this journey has two very big moments of change, birth and death. But they are not beginning and end. They are big moments of change, of transformation. And so, in a way, there is a very serene attitude to death. It's not something scary, it's an integral part of life. You would not be alive if you would not die. So as long as I've lived a long enough and fulfilling enough life to do something, to have a purpose, to enjoy, whether I have a family or I do whatever projects and missions I dedicate myself to this life, then as this life comes to an end, it's almost expected. And what is interesting is then when monks pass 80, 85, and they still didn't get some kind of sudden, disease and rapid death, they actually start talking about it very serenely, like, my time is a bit over. I've done this,
Right.
let's go to whatever is next. That's what am I going to do? Have another dinner with my friends, and go for another hike up the mountain. I've done it already. It's time to go to the next.
Right. The temporary physical body is the ride is over in this one. It's time to
Yeah, they
elevate.
feel that exactly, exactly. This ride is getting old. It's boring. It's starting to creak a little bit when this merry-go-round is creaking and rusty. Maybe it's time to go.
This is a belief I've seen in my travels around the world that sometimes there isn't this fear of death. There isn't this, it's the end of everything. And it's something that I've noticed as Western civilizations step away from spirituality. You could say religion, but I believe it's not just based in any singular religion. It's in spirituality and understanding of something bigger than yourself, that we're spiritual beings in this body, for this time that we have in the physical plane, and there are other planes. But I will say that, the more we get away from that belief system, the more fear there is, because it's only this time. It's more of that FOMO, as we say, fear of missing out, because it's our only time. We only have this, and then we go in the ground, and that's it forever. I think that, at least in my understanding and seeing how others have lived without that belief, that this is energy never really dies. You just continue on in different planes. And, this is just part of the ongoing journey, makes life more enjoyable, makes it so that you don't have that constant fear of something happening and it all being over. And that was it. That was your only try at this life.
But even if you have this deep-seated fear, let's for a moment remove any kind of spiritual belief. Um, let's become purely clinical and logical. Does it make any sense to have fear for the inevitable?
No.
It is the silliest of fears that you can have. I mean, I am afraid of the one thing that will for sure happen to me,
Right.
Then shouldn't I use that fear perhaps as a data point to inspire me, first of all, to live as much as I can the present time? Because the present time is the only reality that I'm certain of. As you said, it could go in a moment and maybe it's really all finished. So if you have this fear of missing out in life, well, live today. Don't exist today, live today. Don't spend a day scrolling mindfully somebody else's life on social media or watching some fictional life on Netflix. Live your own life to the best of your potential. And also, as a secondary data point, if this fear makes you so afraid of life ending, well, do all those things that we know that science and medicine teaches us that may prolong the fear, may distance this event a little bit. So if I know that eating A rather than B may make the event happen a bit later, well, I'm
Mhm.
going to eat A, not B. Or if I know that today to move a little bit more may move that event by a few years, well, that should be a pretty strong motivator to move. So I think that to just blindly be afraid of an inevitability, it's rather foolish. But if we have that fear, then to use that fear as a motivator to truly live life to the best of our abilities, that may be actually useful.
Yes. I think these are, beautiful points to hit on, that regardless of your belief system, see past that and make the most of it. If you truly believe this is the only one life you live, make the most of it. And if you don't use that as a fear base, and understand that things, will go on in the continuum, but to continuously appreciate life to the most and live it your healthiest way. Walter, you've obviously got, a lot of things going on. You're chief wellness officer, co-founder, advisor, all these things. What are you excited about moving into the future? Out of all these pieces, the apps, the, trainings and everything, what are you excited about?
I'm very excited about the merging of technology, modern science and medicine, and traditions.
Mm,
I think that there is a lot of wonderful wisdom in these traditional practices. And I'm not just referring to Shaolin, which is, of course, the dearest to me because of my history, but yoga and many other traditions around the world. I think there is profound wisdom in that, both in terms of taking care of our bodies and minds on a very practical level, anything from nutrition to training to meditation, but also on a deeper level, philosophical and spiritual teachings on how to better manage things like the fears and the profound questions that we've just asked about life and death and so on. So I think that there is wonderful wisdom there. And if we can truly intersect that wisdom, rediscover it and intersect it with modern science and medicine, and then use technology to make it easily utilizable by everyone, I think that that's the ideal scenario for the future of wellness, in my opinion. And that's what I'm personally working towards as much as I can. And as you mentioned, these contrasting words, I love this contrast. For example, last week I was in the tech company that I helped co-found, this Xing AI Coach. And it's, of course, a very high-tech office with very young people who talk about, AI and code and LLMs and all kinds of things that I understand maybe 10% of what they are talking. And tomorrow I'm flying to China, and I will be in the 2,000-year-old temple with my fellow monks and with my master, who is a super traditional guy who never used a computer and who thinks that all this modern stuff is some kind of, strange things and so on. So I love to conjugate these two worlds, and I think that there is something special there that needs to be nurtured.
Oh, I love that too, and I really appreciate what you're doing because you can take from both sides and you can find yourself in the middle. I think in a day and age where everyone's so polarized about right, wrong, this, that, you can still have your own mind to say, what if both? And we meet in the middle and find that compromise of it to help us rather than, point at the other side, say wrong, bad, all these things. So I love your work and everything you're doing. Walter, where can more people learn about you and connect with you?
I think the easiest, of course, is social media. There's also my website, xingme.info. But I think just in social media, whether it's my birth name or my monk name, they can find me and reach out, and I will be more than happy to share whatever I can share with them.
Well, Walter, this was a real pleasure. I truly appreciate the conversation and hearing your story, and thank you so much for your work.
Thank you so much for having me. The pleasure was mine.
And be sure to visit that's xingmi.info, Jingmi, for more information. Until next time, continue writing your own healing story.